I really want to know, but I know we cannot know what it was like for the disciples at any part of their journey with Christ, but maybe especially in the days following his crucifixion. We can imagine and we can speculate, and I certainly do, but we cannot know for certain. We were not there, and there was a very long time ago, and there is strange to us these years later. We did not see Jesus' face, sit with him, walk with him, eat with him, laugh with him, hear his eloquence, watch his power, or hide out at the end. We cannot know all that they wondered or all that they felt, because felt is sparse in the accounts handed down to us. We know only what those accounts tell us. And we know that on that first Easter, the disciples were in a house and all the doors were locked. We are told they are locked for fear. Now, this seems hardly meritorious conduct on the part of Jesus' disciples, that especially in the face of Mary's Easter proclamation, "I have seen the Lord," they hide. But then again, theologian Paul Tillich said, when the longed-for perfection of life does not appear, when the old compulsions reign within us as they have before, despair destroys courage. So as much as fear, there was also surely enormous despair, born of grief and confusion. Grief over the loss of their teacher, their companion, their counselor, their Messiah, and also grief and confusion over their lost place in the world. It was also brief, their time with Jesus. How could it have been so brief? They felt valued, they felt important. There were times they felt invincible. They were sure Jesus was invincible. How did we get here? I can hear them ask. I can hear their hearts cry out. How can it and we be so broken and so suddenly broken? Easter began with an empty tomb, and that emptiness may have been all they could feel. And I would expect as much. Grief matters, and grief takes time. But Jesus doesn't take much time. Into the house where the disciples hid came Jesus, not bothering to open the door, just entering as if the door wasn't there. And where else would he come but into the middle of brokenness, despair, a loss of courage, a waning of hope? And he says, "Peace be with you." Peace. And so it was. Now, Thomas was not there. And so maybe we wonder, why wasn't Thomas with them? Was he simply getting on with things? Was he returning to life as it was before Jesus? Or was he starting something new? Or was he trying to continue what Jesus had begun? Was he so confused that he was trying to distance himself from the other disciples, gather his thoughts, sort out his feelings? Was he angry with God in his grief? Had he taken himself to some of those places he knew Jesus had gone to pray and prayed there himself as Jesus had taught him? When the disciples finally see Thomas, they tell him that they have seen the Lord, Mary's words, and he becomes a bit upset by the news. "Unless I see the mark of the nails in his hands and put my finger in the mark of the nails and my hand in his side, I will not believe." Doubt, no doubt, was present. But is that all that was present? Mary's lone testimony is one thing, but this is a group testimony. So maybe there is hurt that he had been left out, or anger with himself that he had separated himself from the others at such an inopportune time. It could be these, all of these, something else. So Jesus makes another appearance, Thomas now present. And he repeats his greeting to all who are there, "Peace be with you." But then he turns to Thomas, because this visit is for Thomas, to offer what Thomas has asked and what Thomas needs. And it drives Thomas to his knees in humility and recognition of the face of God. There was no need to put his fingers in the mark of the nails or his hand in Jesus' pierced side. His words must have seemed utter foolishness to him then. Christ is risen. Christ is risen indeed. I have seen the Lord. And Jesus says, "Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have come to believe." Well, Thomas has gone down in history as doubting Thomas, but I think this unfairly singles him out. I think it also minimizes the extraordinary event of the resurrection of Christ. The first to see the risen Christ was Mary Magdalene, and yet she did not recognize him until he said her name. She mistook him for the gardener. And I think it reasonable and possible that doubt got in the way of her recognition. When Mary tells the disciples she has seen Jesus and that he is alive, we are told nothing of their reaction to her testimony. We hear simply that they were locked away in fear. And I think it reasonable and possible that they doubted Mary's testimony, so fear held them captive, just as it is reasonable and possible that Thomas doubted their testimony later. The disciples, right up through the crucifixion of Jesus, still struggled to understand who they were following and what it all meant. They failed to remember what Jesus told them would happen. And doubt is easy when understanding is dim, and our understanding about God and the things of God is always dim. And then things happen, and doubt creeps in. It is the unseeing nature of faith that allows doubt to creep. And it is painful, and it is frightening, and in it peace is elusive. Because we are not whole, doubt seems to walk with faith. And I believe doubt is not faith's enemy, but faith's companion. Facing it can serve to answer it and to increase our faith, weirdly enough. Moments of doubt are often better at driving the questions that keep us from being too comfortable in ourselves, moving us from a sort of spiritual tourism to a religious quest, compelling us to prayer, ever deeper and more honest, causing the surrenders needed to rest in God, to find our center there more and more. Moments of doubt keep us humble before God, an acknowledgement that we do not have God captive, we do not have God's ways all figured out, we do not, in fact, know God's thoughts, just that they are not ours, as Isaiah says. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have come to believe. I do not hear this as a rebuke of Thomas or of the disciples or of the many to whom Jesus would appear sometimes more than once before his ascension. I hear awe. I hear prophecy. I can imagine Jesus behind locked doors with the disciples. He appears to them now, but soon he will ascend. And he sees 1 week turn into 1 year, and then into 10, and 10 to 100, and 100 to 500, and 500 to 1,000, and 1,000 to 2, and millions will believe, though they have not seen. Christ's life and ministry and death and resurrection will matter over the long haul, will always be remembered and will always inspire and will always bring peace to those who claim that peace. The work the disciples will do once they've left that locked room will matter. Christ sees that you will believe and that it will matter. Yet we have not been left without sight of the risen Christ. Fairly constantly in the gospel accounts, he has taught us how to see him, risen, alive. It may not be the same as he appeared to his disciples and followers, but it is no less real, no less tangible. We can see the risen Christ with the sick and the suffering and the forgotten, with the hungry and the blind and those who cannot walk, with the dying and with the dead. We see the Lord with the children and with young Sabrina, who's to be baptized this morning. We see Christ with the captive and the outcast and the very alone. We see the risen Christ with the poor in spirit, with those who mourn and with the meek. We see him with those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, and always with the merciful, with the pure in heart, and with the peacemakers, and with the persecuted. We see Christ whenever 2 or 3 are gathered together in his name and in the breaking of the bread, with those who hang on to hope, and those who hang on to the hope of another, having none of their own. Whenever we look for light in the darkness, Christ is there. We see Christ in those for whom doubt threatens to swallow faith. And if we listen, as we must, seeing Christ with these, we will hear him say, "Take up your cross and follow me. Follow me. My yoke is easy, my burden is light. Do this in remembrance of me." Peace be with you.